an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Wintersteel Chapters 20, 21, and 22. That's right, kids. 3 chapters this week. In this section, Yerin's blood shadow decides to take a vacation. And it's really alarming to me that it's able to do this. Everything about the blood shadow makes me very nervous. And I understand why it wants what it wants, but also, yikes. Yikes. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. Hi, Andy, if you're out there. Yeah, guys, look. This is a really fun quandary that Will White has created for Yerin. This thing killed her family. I was going to say her parents, but it's like she had brothers and sisters too, if I'm not mistaken. At least one. Hi, Andy. And yet, it's her greatest potential ally. And yet, there is something to potentially be gained by burning it, as the Winter Sage puts it. And yet, it's enough of a whole person that I feel so much compassion for it. And yet, it's not, because it's simply copying so much of Yerin that it feels like it's not really its own person. But it is, though. Like, it's not in that it doesn't have an organically developed personality that comes from itself. It's taken a lot of, like, its reaction and language and everything from Yerin. But clearly, it has its own mind and its own will and desires that nevertheless do seem to overlap with Yerin's desires and will in their way. It's just more impulsive and willing. It's more childlike in a way. So I'm left in this position where I deeply understand Yerin being afraid of it, not trusting it, worrying about how far to let it off its leash. And yet I want nothing more than for Yerin to completely throw in with it and be buds with it. You know, it's just awful to sit on the sidelines and be like, look, I think you're doing the wrong thing, but I 100% get why you're doing the wrong thing. And I don't like being in that position where I really understand it that well. You know what I mean? It just feels, I had such hope in a scene that will come up later where Yerin is given the choice to burn it or not, and she chooses not to, and that's when she gives the blood shadow its name, or it chooses its name. And I really was like, okay, this feels like Yerin has decided that she's going to try and make peace with it. And then things go another way. And it's not as if Yerin has backtracked on the alliance. I think she's willing to make it. It's more that the blood shadow's patience is sort of at an end. It feels a lot more like she is finally at a point where she's able to be a full person more than ever before. And she has been so frustrated for so long at the fact that she hasn't had enough will to overpower Yerin and do what she wants, that now that she does, she can't really restrain herself very easily. She's just, the desire to get out and do things is so deep. You know, it's like a kid that's been sheltered too much. And then they go to college and they just go fucking nuts and just get drunk every night and fuck everything that moves. And their parents are shocked by their behavior. And it's like, what did you think was going to happen? You didn't let your kid live. And now they got to go live, and they're going to do it as hard as they fucking can. And I feel a little bit like that's kind of what's going on. And what's sort of ironic is there's all this talk with Yerin earlier, when she's trying to figure out what to pursue for her advancement and the ways that she could advance, the different things that she could take advantage of. And she has gotten very frustrated at the fact that the Winter Sage sees her master whenever she looks at her. And there's a feeling, I feel like that maybe Ruby is having a bit of like a identity crisis in a similar way to Yerin, where she's trying to figure out sort of the same thing that we as readers are trying to figure out. Like, what am I if I'm not just a reflection of my host? Like, am I my own person? I feel like my own person. I want things that they don't want, which indicates a separate will and desire, which to me would define being my own person. And yet I don't have the freedom that a person would. And so I don't know what role I even play. I don't know. It's just sort of wild that this thing is able to have so much in common with Yerin, not just on a superficial level, but on that sort of like psychological level. And yet the two of them do not really understand each other, you know, where if they could get past some of this baggage, for lack of a better word, then they would probably realize that their situations are weirdly, there's a commonality there. But, you know, I don't know. It's just such a weird bonkers, like her breaking off on her own and going to see Lindon. She behaves with Lindon like she fully expects him to treat her as if she is Yerin. And he has had to push her back when she got way too close to him and was able to sort of distract from the fact that he was pushing her away by asking her questions about her development and how everything works for her as a sort of like spirit manifestation. So she got distracted enough explaining to him how this all happened that I don't feel the rejection in that moment really had time to sink in. But it feels like in the rest of that chapter, she's inching closer and closer to him throughout. And it's just going to be a matter of time before he has to be like, girl, no. And I don't know what she does if that happens. Like, and what if, and this is like a what if, like, not that I think that this is likely or even at all possible to happen, but let's say Lindon went for it. That Lindon was just like, I don't know, blood shadow, close enough. How fucked up would that be for Yerin? You know, Lindon would never, don't get me wrong. I have no doubts about that at all. But what would it be like as a person to find out that somebody hooked up with like a version of you that isn't you, but occupies your soul? And does she, when the blood shadow returns to her soul, does she get the memories of that blood shadow absorbed into her? Like, you know, when Lindon absorbs the Madra of people that he's overpowered, he gets part of their memory, their consciousness absorbed in that he has to sort of fight down. Does that happen now that the blood shadow is out here experiencing things that Yerin isn't anymore? They're totally separated here. I don't know that they've ever... I was going to say, I don't know that they've ever experienced totally separate things, but I'm thinking like it got up in the middle of the night while Yerin was unconscious and no alarm bells went off. Yerin didn't seem to be aware that was happening. I don't know that if it rejoined her after doing things like that by itself, if she wouldn't sense that it had been taking its leave in the middle of the night. A lot of questions for me about how that works exactly. I don't know. So, all right. Chapter 20. Northstrider resented anyone summoning him. This was really fun for me because I recently listened to the end of Ghostwater with Owen. And Northstrider, when we're in his head in that ending, is such an asshole. And it's really easy to sort of forget what an asshole he is in the previous book, because he does help Lindon out. You know, he instructs him in how to absorb Madra. He is... I don't want to say he's interested in Lindon. I feel like that's too strong a word, although maybe he is, because Lindon's really, as far as we have seen, one of the very few, hunger artists is what I kind of want to call him. And maybe that is a nice, change for Northstrider, who probably doesn't run up against somebody who has the ability he has. But Northstrider, I feel like, softened in my mind in terms of his attitude. And I grew a little bit warmer towards him. And coming at him from his perspective here, I was reminded that he's such a dick. And look, it's not even that this isn't justified. He is right in a lot of the way he sees things. It's all laced with this, I think so much of myself that it's hard for me to get past that kind of pride and see somebody as still being a person with unbiased judgment who has empathy, and it's we know he has empathy. We have seen how cut up he was about people being killed in his memory. So we are aware that he feels for humanity when they are victimized. But he also sees people who are beneath him as so much less than him that it's really difficult for those two personality traits to occupy the same space for me. He's when he comes into Ghostwater as it's breaking down, he literally refers to Harmony as the worm on the ground. That's the way that and Harmony at this point has done nothing to offend Northstrider specifically. There's nothing personal about Harmony that I would feel would offend Northstrider. I don't know if Northstrider's aware of what happened here before he showed up. I don't think so. If he were, then maybe I would be okay, he really doesn't think much of Harmony because of the way that Harmony was given the opportunity to get out and fucked himself over, and he thinks he's an idiot. It doesn't seem like that. It just really seems like, oh, this pathetic idiot whose life I could save, I'm choosing not to because he's weak and didn't get out, and that's his own fucking fault. Which, putting it with people who were slaughtered by this dragon and how bad he felt for them, seeing how he couldn't give a wet shit about Harmony's life in this instance when he had every ability to save him, I just don't really know how those things mesh together, maybe he knew Harmony well, or sort of knew him by reputation and had decided he didn't like him, or I don't know. It's just, there's a contradiction there that I don't think is a problem with the writing. It's just, it's difficult for me to get a hold of how I feel about him. And it does seem like he holds what's best for the collective as his priority. So I think that he's on the side of right for the most part. And I really did not want him to save Harmony. So there's that. But it's tough to see somebody as being compassionate when they were willing to let someone just remain in he didn't even kill Harmony. He just left him to die, you know? So Ben says he saw what Harmony did the entire time. I mean, he didn't, like, when we're in his POV, he gets sort of woken up from absorbing Madra from this dragon, Blood Madra, by the feel that Ghostwater is crashing down. So it didn't seem to me like he was aware of what was going on before that. Now, I mean, maybe he's able to tell after, and what are their security cameras? I don't know. But it is I don't feel like that's canon. I feel like that's an assumption. I don't know. Ben says after absorbing the tree's memories, he heard the story. So I didn't know that he absorbed the tree's memories. Did we know that? Evil says, Harmony killed the Skysworn and tried to kill Logold. Why does Harmony deserve respect? Well, see, that's the thing, Evil, is that I don't understand exactly, like, again, I don't know how much he knows about what Harmony did. And it's unclear to me where monarchs draw the line for behavior, because Harmony was apparently like a rising star in the Akura clan, and I wouldn't think that Malice would hold with that kind of behavior either. But evidently, like, Charity was, like, saw him as the next huge name for the family, knowing full well that he was the kind of person who would do this sort of thing. So there's a lot that I don't get about what's allowed and not. I would think that sort of behavior would be frowned upon by all because it weakens a family's position, and that it's really sort of impulsive and unnecessary. You know, there was no reason for him to kill Renfei. There really wasn't. He just did it because he was irritated and it was ridiculous. And so the fact that Charity, like, holds this kid in such high regard, that's part of what confuses me as well, is that evidently this was being encouraged, I guess. So, you know, I have a hard time with understanding monarchs and their decisions on things. I mean, this is something that we see from Yerin a little bit later as well. She gets really up in Malice's face. And honestly, Malice seems so unbothered, almost entertained by the fact that Yerin is actually willing to, like, talk to her like a person and not falling all over herself. And I really enjoy that with Yerin. It reminds me of when she first met Charity, and Charity asked what she should carve, and nobody wanted to tell her what she should. And Yerin was just like, a dragon. Like, she doesn't care. So Mordecai says, you know, now that I think of it, considering they knew what was coming and they are allies, it's odd Northstrider didn't save him unless he thought he was weak and a liability. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of where I'm at, is like, it doesn't feel like that fits with his personality that I've seen, that he would make that choice. But I don't know how well Will White had him sketched out in his own mind. You know, he may not have really known where he wanted to go with Northstrider as a character quite yet. And so maybe it doesn't really work. But yeah, you know, it's just like, anyway, all of this to say, coming back into his POV, he's just so angry so much of the time. And it's so fun because most of his anger is directed at what he basically considers like a lackey of the Abaddon. And he is so mad that this fucking dude can summon him and treat them all like children. And I really, honestly, as much as he is like lower on the totem pole than this dude, so he shouldn't hold him in such contempt, I enjoy that he does so much. I find it really funny. He longed to punch this sniveling messenger out of reality. One day, Northstrider would join those higher up on the food chain, not the low ranks of Abaddon drones, but the true world-striding champions. I really want to know how that works. How do you skip this part? Because my assumption was you become some bullshit messenger for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and then you like maybe get promoted. But he's acting like you could just skip that, which, all right, if you can. So Malice joins them after a moment. The dragon is here. What's his face? Yerin? I always want to say Kieran Culkin. Sesheth Kunaz lounged against a pillar. That's his name. And Regan Shen. So let's see. Kieran, here it is. Kieran began to speak. It has come to my attention that you are hedging around the borders of my instruction not to interfere with the tournament, positioning yourselves to take advantage of the outcome, moving your pieces around the board. Yeah. Of course. Are you... what did you think was going to happen when you told them that you were giving them a weapon that wouldn't fail no matter who it was directed at? Hi? Are you kidding? And honestly, like, Northstrider has exactly my reaction, which is just like, well, we would have been fucking idiots if we didn't do that. What are you talking about? Oh my God. Honestly, how dare you act like, oh, you're kind of breaking the rules. No, I'm not. I am doing what you motivated me to do. Honestly, it feels like you did that shit on purpose. And if you're mad about this result, I don't know what you know about fucking human beings and human nature, but you're bad at your job. If this wasn't your intended outcome, of course this was going to happen. You fucking idiot. So, I've allowed it thus far because nothing has been too flagrant and because your games amuse me. I hate him so much. Honestly, Northstrider being so mad, it's so fun. Northstrider feels to me in this scene like Narugwe felt every time that he was in a room with Athen. Except Athen, I still, as much as I understood Narugwe hating Athen, I still loved Athen. But this is like, what if Athen, but like not charming at all, you know, not actually somebody that I've grown to like in any way. And Northstrider's reaction to him is my reaction to him. So basically there's a bit of a like farce here where, Malice acts so indignant about the whole thing, and Regan Shen sort of like insults her, and she gets really indignant about that, and eventually it all leads to them agreeing as a group to create boundaries so that they can't leave the Nine Cloud court at all, and they create this like barrier. Let's see. The restrictions settled in an invisible column around Nine Cloud City. The barrier was perceptible only to the four of them and affected them only. But now it was literally impossible for them to touch anyone outside without first removing the restriction. It was perfect. Northstrider had already done all the work he needed in the world at large, and now his plans were falling into place. Though he was certain the other monarchs were all thinking the same thing. So I am dying to know what he's got set up here, that he really wanted everybody restricted. I am assuming it's going to be good, but I don't really have any theories on it. I don't know. So then we go to Yerin, and she and Charity are talking about how at risk everybody is. And this is something that like, it makes sense after this conversation. I should have predicted that Lindon wasn't going to show up to Yerin's fight in this next chapter. But I was surprised that he hadn't. And then I remembered like they've been discussing how trapped Charity's family is and how anxious she is and doesn't feel like she can really do anything. If I could go snatch my family from under the noses of hostile heralds, I would be on my way right now. A herald may not be able to travel through space directly, but they can stop me from doing so. So if I showed my face, I would be trapped. And yeah, it's just a bad situation, and Yerin's growing more and more agitated herself. She starts to get really worried later when she loses her first fight, because everybody's safety, as far as she is concerned, is riding on her shoulders. In a very different way, like, obviously Mercy had this as well, but with Mercy it felt much more like she was worried primarily about her mother. And Yerin, it's a different thing now. Things have escalated to a point where it's like her family, her whole family that she's created for herself, you know? So she basically goes back and forth with Charity about how Charity could do something if she really wanted. And finally, Min Shui is like, look, if you want to do something, you have to win 2 fights. That's what you can do. This is directly related to you being the victor in this tournament. So if you are eager to get your fucking sword out and go save some people, think of it like that. That's what you're doing. And that sort of works, honestly. Yeren's just like, yeah, all right, solid point. And then they go into the fight. Practically right after that conversation, we cut to the fight. And Yan Shumei takes note of the fact that Yerin looks like shit. She hasn't been, obviously, like, adequately resting. She's anxious. There's just a whole thing going on with her. And Shumei is very confident when we're inside of her head of her victory here. And honestly, it came as a bit of a surprise, because I sort of expected, from the way that everybody was talking, for Yerin to be able to, like, get an easy victory over Yan Shumei. And instead, Crusher turns out to be, like, so much more of a danger than I had expected him to be. I guess that I had thought, because he is a Blood Shadow, that due to Yerin also having a Blood Shadow, there would be some susceptibility there. And perhaps it would be more vulnerable to an attack from a Blood Shadow versus a person. That because she had one of her own, it would serve as a distraction to keep it off her. I don't know. But I just really didn't think that Shumei was going to turn out to be so much of a threat. And she really nearly gets the best of Yerin. It's tough. I was just like, I liked the fact that I didn't want it to be, like, it's not as interesting, but I did think it was going to be, more that, like, if Yerin lost the first fight, if we're going to try and inject some tension here, that it would be more because she made a misstep of her own, versus that Yan Shumei really turned out to be such a formidable foe. Jake says, we're going to skip over Yan Shumei having a crush on Northstrider. Evil says, yes, this needs to be mentioned. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, so she is, she's feeling his, let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where she mentions it. Yeah, with his shaggy hair and rugged, unshaven look, Shumei had always thought he was the most handsome monarch she'd had the privilege of seeing. Not that she would say so out loud. He might hear it. So yeah, that is really fun. And I was thinking about how I had compared him to the dude from The Big Lebowski because of the fact that he was wearing like 2 different sandals that one time. But honestly, the whole thing with The Big Lebowski is that he wanted to get that carpet back because it really pulled the room together. And Northstrider couldn't give any fewer fucks about aesthetics, so that's totally not him. So I'm still struggling. Like, I really don't see him in my head as Jason Momoa, but I am trying to cast him as somebody else, and I can't come up with anybody. I'm going to have to keep on thinking it through. So yeah, this fight between the two of them, basically, Yerin is able to withstand Crusher a little bit more than Shumei had expected. She's able to stop one of his, like, downward, basically, smashes with an arm with her sword arm and sword, which nobody is able to stop them. Like, it's just never happened. So the fact that she can withstand it, that's pretty fucking impressive. But it's only the one. When he does it again, then she goes down. And I say then she goes down like it's that. It's really, the fights are really something, and I would love to see them on screen. But after the first one, when she loses, this moment is so great because it starts off back in the waiting room. Yerin's blood shadow shouted at her, "That's the power we could have. That's the power we should have if your spine didn't shake when you looked at me." "Then stay on your leash," Yerin spat. "Her dog doesn't bite back." Yerin's anger was more than a match for the shadows because hers was born from the fear that filled every inch of her spirit. One more loss. That was what stood between her and the death of everyone she cared about. One more mistake. And this is part of what I was talking about in the last episode, where Yerin, I feel, I want her to accept that this thing is its own person, even though it doesn't feel that way. Honestly, because Yerin is doing something with this blood shadow that nobody has ever successfully managed to do, except for the blood sage who his ran off, so we can't really use that as a barometer. She's delving into some uncharted territory here. And everyone's assumption about how blood shadows function and what they are is based on old, outdated information that hasn't been investigated to the degree that this blood shadow has begun to advance. There's no way to know anything about this thing without taking into account what it has to say about itself. You know, like, nobody, I mean, who has studied the blood sage's shadow? It seems like it went off and did its own thing and is essentially a separate sacred artist now. If it's possible for it to do that, it's not a parasite anymore. It's been born. It's changed. It's different. So this winter sage constantly saying that it's a parasite, like, yeah, it occupies Yerin's soul, but it doesn't need to anymore. It doesn't feel like. It could break off and be a separate entity. And I don't know if that would actually harm it or harm Yerin. It would slow Yerin's progress, I assume, but it wouldn't act, that's different than actually harming her. And so everybody's just sort of treating it as if it's the same sort of like monster that they imagined it to be before it had really taken form. And it's not, and nobody knows what it is now. Nobody knows how to handle it. There's no precedent for any of this. So I want Ruby to like make that argument that everybody has this assumption they know how like to deal with her. Based on what? Some shit that only half applies, not even half anymore. And that they need to start investigating completely new ways of coming at this situation. And I want Yerin to recognize how something that had been her enemy can turn around and be an ally, and how sort of beautiful that is in a way, that she was able to hold on to this thing in a way that was so unexpected and so should have been so beyond her as a child that it got a sage's attention. It got him looking at her going, well, damn. And now it's arguing about how it wants to fight by her side. It's telling her straight up, can you please not be so scared of me? I want for us to be a team. And she just can't quite get there. It seems like she eventually does, because she puts aside the option of burning it and helps find a name for Ruby. But you know, it's tough because then Ruby decides that she's going to go off and find Lindon on her own. And I feel like things were going okay, like in terms of the progress towards them actually being allies and being a team. We were on the right track, and her deciding to do that impulsive thing and completely go off on her own, I feel like that's really going to damage the relationship between the two of them. And it's tough because, like, on the one hand, I wouldn't blame Yerin for wanting to keep an even tighter hold of her now than she had. But on the other, keeping the tight hold is what caused Ruby to just be like, fuck you, and leave. So it's like being a parent. It really is, you know, trying to balance being somebody who actually, you know, is responsible for your child's welfare while also allowing them to make mistakes and do things that hurt you to watch, and knowing that's part of them growing up and needing to be able to, like, pull your hands back and let go of it. So yeah, I really feel for them in this situation. I love so much too the discussion about what they're going to name her. I love this so much. The first named spirit she thought of was Little Blue, so she threw out a suggestion. Big Red. The shadow flinched back. Yerin didn't appreciate the reaction. Not your mother, am I? How about just plain red? Scarlet, Charity suggested. Blood Yerin, the Winter Sage put in. You could call her Blairin. I swear to God, I fucking cackled. I was eating when she said that, and I just went pfft, and had to, like, slap my hand over my mouth to keep me from, like, spitting food. I cracked up so bad over that. Oh God, people are telling me in the chat that these names were all community memes. This was all like a nod to fans. Oh, everybody was calling her Blairin. I hate it. You know what, you guys? Fandom is weird. It is. It's just a weird thing. All right. So finally, Charity says Ruby, and the shadow is like, yeah, definitely. Yerin's a little surprised because to her, Ruby is such a girly name that she doesn't get it. But when the Blood Shadow tells her, she says, rubies are worth a pile of gold and people can't get enough of them and they're nice to look at. I like Ruby. All right, you know what? You've made a very compelling argument here. So we need a new strategy. Yerin, the binding of your sword should trap even a blood shadow as developed as Crusher. It will, the Winter Sage confirmed, if the shadow can cover you while you activate the field. Ruby, the blood shadow corrected. Can you? Yerin demanded. Ruby gave her a disturbingly familiar grin. We can take turns. So, spoilers, she does win. I'm going to jump past those fights. It is badass, though, and the two of them working together is very exciting. And then we go to Regan Shen, who's watching from the sidelines and is really, like, a little disappointed in the fact that Yansha Mei has seemed to rely on this weapon that she had hidden. And everybody sort of knew, because Yansha Mei had likely gotten a weapon as a prize, and nobody had ever seen her use one, that she had a weapon in her back pocket, and they were all sort of waiting to see it. And when we're in Yansha Mei's POV, she thinks to herself about how, like, she always wins so easily because Crusher is so unbeatable, that if she were ever forced to rely on her own ability, if Crusher was ever taken out of the equation, it would be a lot more difficult because she hasn't been personally challenged in that sort of way that often anymore. And yeah, she sort of puts all of her hopes on this weapon that don't really pan out because it's too advanced for her to actually activate it fully. Yansha Mei had so many other options, but she was blinded by the power of her blood shadow and of her bow. Then again, Yerin was perhaps her natural enemy. Yerin could match up to Crusher's strength, however briefly, and her own blood shadow copied a large measure of that same power. That alone mitigated Shome's biggest advantage. In virtually every other category, Shome was outmatched. Yerin had more powerful techniques, more combat experience, and a powerful will for her level. He had hoped for a win, and even coached Jian Shome personally for a few days, but ultimately, it affected little. He had always been playing for second place. And I'm like, oh, word? Okay. I mean, I guess that's true, but it was weird to hear him say it like that. And he asks Shesef Kunaj if he's going to bribe Yerin to throw the match. And he tells Regan Shen, well, whoever wins, wins. What do you mean? And he's like, yeah, you would say that since you figure you're going to win. You're not worried about it. So he reaches out to contact Yerin himself. And Yerin finds herself immediately pulled into Malice's presence because Malice knew what he was going to do and wanted to thwart him. And he gets very angry over it. But then we get the wonderful conversation between Malice and Yerin, in which Malice... Basically, Yerin is like, why are you such a bitch to your daughter? Just straight up. And Malice keeps trying to be like, if you win this, I'll treat you like my own child. And Yerin's like, that's not really a great prize. I've seen how you treat your children. I'm not excited by that. But she does say at one point how she has some options that she has put into play in case Yerin loses. And that does make Yerin feel a little bit better. Obviously, really everything is still hinging on her winning, but knowing that a monarch has gotten at least a contingency plan makes her feel a little bit less hopeless about the whole thing. So Charity and Minshui can teach you almost anything I could. Though I have more skill and experience, imparting it to you is another matter. You must advance to have the win, and if you somehow fully manifest the sword icon, you will, of course, win handily. And she talks a little bit about Yerin figuring out who she is herself. In a similar way to, like, Yerin being like, she keeps wanting me to be my master. Malice seems to be aware of that struggle within Yerin. To be like, you've got to forge your own path. You can't just try and copy. That's not what this is about. And if you want to touch the sword icon, it happens because you have become a manifestation of swordsmanship. And you can't be if you're just trying to mimic what somebody else has done. That won't be the thing. And I rather liked the fact that she has tuned into that struggle with Yerin. Trying to find the spot here. I'm glad we understand each other. Yerin was certain that they didn't. An icon, as I'm sure you've picked up, is a symbol of a powerful concept. The more you represent the concept, the better. In your case, you must become a symbol of swordsmanship, not in the eyes of mankind, but by the measure of something deeper. You have to. Imitating another symbol isn't good enough. Have you become a symbol of swordsmanship or a copy of your master? What is your signature? And Yerin says, bleed me if I know. Yerin, sweetie. Yeah, exactly. Bleed you if you know. It's your blood shadow, sweetie. It's your blood shadow. That's your signature. You have a partner. You've managed to exert your will. You have created a copy of yourself. That's your signature, you dodo bird. But she doesn't want to think of the blood shadow as part of her path. She wants to think of it as an obstacle separate from everything that she needs to overcome. And it's just too late for that. It's too late for that. You can't do that. That's not the way to approach it anymore. You've waited too long. It's not happening. So Malice ends it with, I can't give you more time as Northstrider did. There's only so much that can be taught or trained. You've already done the Akura name proud. If I will treat you like Mercy's sister if you win. You can marry into the head family, take Pride if you want, to which I'm like, oh my God, she would fucking eat Pride alive. He wouldn't last a day. She would kill him by accident just out of pure fucking temper. Honestly, I would love to see it. I would love to see it. That would be fucking hilarious. Pride would not know what hit him. That would be a bad fucking... Ugh. Take any of the Akura men who catch your eye, and your children will be considered full-blooded members of the clan. I will grant you every wish. And I enjoy that Yerin, it's not even that she argues about wanting Pride specifically. She doesn't I wondered if she'd bring up Lindon, but that's too vulnerable for her. She wouldn't bring up Lindon, because then that's showing her hand how much she cares about Lindon. And she doesn't want to do that to anybody. She barely wants to tell herself how much she cares about Lindon. So I should have known she wasn't going to say that. But Jan says, can she choose Fury? Fury and Yerin, that's a pairing I could see. The two of them are both so reckless in their way and just always want to fight. I could see that. So, chapter 22. Safara absolutely wipes the floor with Brother Aiken. It takes like 30 seconds. And then we have the prize that she gets, the Moonlight Bridge. And this allows for immediate transportation anywhere in the world, but it's got caveats. She can't bring anyone with her. If she's going to someplace that's very distant, it can take up to 3 days to recharge. It's got its things that kind of keep it from being as helpful as it could otherwise have been. And personally, I'm a fan of that. As a reader, I don't want something to be so much of a key item that it could become potentially a total crutch. I feel about it the same way that I would feel like the fact that Lindon has to have fought somebody before Dross can make a template of how that person fights and how Lindon would stand up against him. If he could just go in and know already, it would be too easy. But I appreciate that there's some caveats that make it so that there are things that keep it from being too overpowered. And also that Lindon, when he was doing his training with the Akura, he tried to solve puzzles without Dross's help, so that if he were ever in a position where Dross couldn't assist him, he would still be able to do basic stuff like figure out what attack is coming at him. So, I as much as I was kind of like when we find out that she can't bring people with her, I was like, oh, that's a shame. And then I was immediately following it up with, no, that's good though. That places a limitation on what you can do. Otherwise, then you just run into what I call Doctor Who territory. I'm covering Doctor Who. For those who don't know, I had never watched the show. We're into season 8. We're going to be starting season 8. And that show, for me, falls into a very lazy, repetitive trope where they just find a thing that saves the day because it's so powerful that it can literally just, pluck them out of a emergency situation completely with, and it's so easy that it's frankly doesn't count to me as real writing. It's Deus Ex Machina type shit. And this could easily have been a little bit that, and I'm really glad that it's not. Then Safara gets a Totem of the Dragon King. It releases a projection of the Dragon King that carries a measure of his spirit and his authority. This is really interesting because what they've done is kind of given her a teeny tiny version of a blood shadow. It's not obviously in actual practice, but it gives Safara, if I'm understanding it correctly, a partner in the ring, so to speak. And so it won't be 2 against 1 when they fight each other. It'll be 2v2. And the Dragon King totem isn't as powerful as a monarch. It's only in proportion to her power. But it's still, that's pretty fucking scary. And I really wonder how the Moonlight Bridge can be used as a weapon, because if used within sight an unlimited number of times, Yerin could dodge attacks really quickly and easily, but I don't know how easy it is to activate it and how much Madra it takes to use, and there's a lot that we don't know, and that's part of what Yerin wanted to spend her time finding out about. But unfortunately, Ruby just activates it and takes off for 3 days, and so she isn't going to be able to investigate, because probably the journey that Ruby made is going to require a full recharge time. So I don't know how much Yerin will actually get to practice with it before her battle, which is the fucking problem. I guess we'll see. So yeah, this is when they have their argument. Ruby goes off on her own. And then we cut to Lindon, who is there absorbing all of the Madra from this dragon. And this, guys, honestly, what Lindon can do is really so scary at this point. It's understandable why a lot of his teammates view him with the suspicion that they do, because in the wrong hands, the ability he has could just be abused to the point where there's not another soul left alive, you know? I mean, and even here, where he's going up against enemies and he's really trying to not kill people, it's still so overwhelming what he's able to do. And it feels so humiliating. Do you know what I mean? The fact that he leaves them alive, but drained and damaged, it's almost worse. I don't know. So the one impression that seeped through clearly, too strong for Dross to suppress, was an overwhelming fear. The black dragon panicked as it tried to escape from the hungry thing on its back, all the way to the end. Honestly, guys, that was so sad to me. It killed me. And then Dross tells him how he's a critic of the gold dragons. He didn't want to be here. He's adopted human children. That he's like, you know, pretty much as upstanding a citizen as any dragon we've ever seen. And Lindon just says he'll recover. And I'm like, I hope he will. Like, how long will that take? I feel really bad. I felt so like, this is rough. Whatever uneasy truce kept the other heralds and their factions from collapsing on fury, Lindon didn't want to push it too far. So, yeah, he beats back the will of this dragon and manages to keep it all under control. And then he gets interrupted by Ruby showing up. And Ruby, like, at first, because he hasn't seen how much further Ruby has come in terms of her growing more and more human looking. So for a moment, he thinks it's Yerin, and then he sees, like, her hair is red, or her eyes are red, like, it's not. And he has an immediate panic reaction because he thinks at first that her blood shadow has finally, like, taken her over and won. And that's what he's seeing. And finally, Dross has to tell him, no, that's not Yerin's body. It's if she had taken Yerin, she'd be a lot more solid. That was a relief, but to the naked eye, it was hard to see how her human form could possibly be more complete. Which I did find interesting. She'd be a lot more solid. Well, what exactly about her isn't solid? Because she's able to throw her arms around Lindon. She's able to fight, you know, things don't just go through her. I don't know. And he notices, like, she has a Madra system. So I'm like, does she infuse herself with Madra to become more the way that he had to do with, like, his remnant arm once upon a time? Otherwise it would sink into things. Maybe that's what she's doing. So yeah, he wants to know all about what she, like, how she has manifested, what the deal is with, like, hunger Madra. And she's really excited to talk with him about it. And finally she says, you know, you could just ask the fucking Titan. And he's like, what? And she's like, yeah, I mean, it's asleep. You could go and ask it. And he says, how to Dross? And Dross is basically like, I mean, you could, go and like, maybe pull some Madra out of it. Like, the way you do with other people. And Lindon's like, that's insane. And Dross is like, yeah, it is. That's why I didn't want to tell you. And right after Lindon's like, that's insane, he's like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do that. We're going to do that fucking bonkers thing you just said. So he tells Mercy his idea, and Mercy's like, oh shit. Okay, yeah, you definitely need my uncle's permission, but low key, that is exactly his fucking bag. He's going to love this idea. So let's go talk to him. And Fury, it's obvious, is really delighted by the whole, like, suggestion, the mere suggestion of it. But he doesn't think that Lindon will be able to withstand the pressure of a Dread God's will. Which, I mean, why would you think so? I understand it. Evil says the fans were outraged. Will had to let everyone know the dragon went home and healed up. From the author, this is from Ben, he posted, he was sent home from the battlefield after having been drained, so he missed the big battle afterwards in which he would likely have been killed. Spoilers! You maybe don't want to share this. I mean, we know there's a big battle coming, but nevertheless, be careful. He goes home and spends time with his family, eventually stabilizing his spirit and living a long and productive life away from the violence he never really cared for anyway. Also, he weaves delicate wicker baskets and always stays hydrated. Oh, that is adorable. That's really cute. Okay. So Pride is here, by the way. He's fucking haunting Lindon's steps because he still has not figured out and isn't interested in Mercy. Pride, get with the program, dude. Just because you don't know how to show your affection. It's not like Lindon and Yerin aren't obviously into each other. Get over it. So, here it is. Nope, Fury said at last. Lindon doesn't understand where the real danger is. Zorus won't murder you, and the Dread God probably won't crush you in its sleep. And even if you drink so much of its Madra that it would pop you from the inside, your arm would break before you were hurt too badly. You have to wrestle with the wills of the people you drain. So he pushes down on Lindon, and then he notices that Lindon is able to resist in a way that he had not been when... I mean, he probably couldn't have done this before, but other people clearly wouldn't be able to withstand this. Fury is very surprised that Lindon can stand up to him at all. So he's like, all right, we're going to go for this a little harder. Let me just press down harder. And they were all shoved back, and the burden on Lindon increased once again. He was being squeezed in the fist of a giant, and he strained for every ounce of power and concentration. Dross was yelling at him, but Lindon's consciousness was a blur, his entire being narrowing down to his struggle to push. Then it was over, and he took in a long, shuddering gasp. And it had to have been really bad, because Dross is worried about him. And Dross doesn't get worried about Lindon. Not really, and I mean that in that he doesn't ever express it. I think he does get worried, really, but he doesn't say, hey, buddy, are you okay? Ever. And he does here. I couldn't even move. He's obviously worried. And that, to me, was the biggest indicator some shit really just happened. When you're wrong, Fury said cheerfully. Let's give you the night to recover, and then you can head out in the morning. What do you think? And Ruby tries to go at Fury. She's being very defensive, but he's able to just push her away. She's nothing for him. And this is when Fury tells them, oh, BT dubs, Yerin won, which they did know already, but they're still excited to hear it officially. And then we have Ruby coming into his room with him and being a little bit too cozy. And he has to put some pretty clear boundaries in place where he's like, I'm going to sleep on the floor. Okay. You'll take the bed. I'll sleep on the floor. And he asks her if she sleeps. And she's like, mostly that's all I do. And I really thought I'd be sick of it. But being like a body away from Yerin is really draining. I'm super tired. So actually I do want to sleep. And she says, if it looks like I'm going to slip back to her spirit, you'd stop me, true? Lindon hesitated. You'll have to go back eventually. 2 days, she sighed. Still got 2 whole days. So, I don't know. I worry about what Ruby could do if Lindon rejected her too brutally. I just don't know how that would affect things between her and Yerin. Like, she's going to be aware if she's in Yerin's body, in her spirit, while Yerin hooks up with Lindon at some point. She will know it's happening. She will see it happening. Will she be jealous of Yerin? I assume she would be jealous of Yerin. How, can she have her own romance? With whom? How would that work? I feel so bad for her in some ways, honestly. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to wrap up. I actually finished somewhat on time, but, I really wanted to mention something. So I was just curious if there was a calendar, a release date calendar for, the next book after this one yet. If there was any sort of vague time that he had mentioned. I'm hoping to have it done by November or something. And I searched for it, and I got Will White's blog, and he had posted in December, and I read this post, and you guys, I have never related to something so fucking much. It was one of those moments where I got teary-eyed reading it because I was like, oh my God, I could have written this. He's taking the first 3 months of the year off, and it turns out that he had sustained some injuries because he has sustained some damage from repetitive movement from writing so much and sitting with bad posture at a desk. All of the things that I struggle with as a podcaster also. And he describes how he pushed himself so hard to write constantly when he first began to do this professionally, because literally he couldn't keep the lights on in his house if he didn't. And those of you who don't know, I became a, quote, professional, and by that I mean I went to podcasting full time in early 2015, and it was absolutely brutal. And I was in the same position where I couldn't rest. I needed to be able to feed myself. And I had Owen as a support system for keeping a roof over my head and everything, but I had to contribute something. And I was in enough debt and not making any money that it was really almost impossible. And eventually he pushed himself so hard that he injured himself, and he has had to take a break because of his health. And, he's finally reached a point where he's successful enough that he can do that, and it's not going to ruin him, and guys, I've had to take a bunch of time off recently. I took a couple weeks in November, and I don't normally do that, but it's the longest break I ever took. And then I wound up getting sick and having to take even more time off. And it was so hard to let myself do it, but I needed to do it. And it was just really ironic to read. It's something that I think people who are self-employed go through. When you are your only source of income, you push too hard. And there's not really a lot of choice about it because you have to stay alive. And that's part of why I started Spoil Me as a commission thing in the first place, was to supplement because I wasn't making enough on Patreon. I'm really still not. And I just really appreciated seeing somebody else who their work is known enough that I have a lot of people in the chats here, but they go through the same sort of struggle. And it's ironic because Lindon's whole thing with so many characters he talks to is that they tell him he needs to fucking chill a little, that he needs to slow down and live his life and enjoy things and not constantly be working. And it feels a little bit like Will White was sort of yelling at himself in those scenes now, reading them. It just has a different flavor a little bit when you think back on it, knowing that he was just relentless himself with his schedule. And anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I appreciated it and related to it. And it just felt so relevant to the text itself that I was just like, wow, I don't know if that was like, that he was aware he was putting part of his own story into this or not, but it really does feel a little bit close to home, So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So I'm going to wrap up. I will be here tomorrow evening, 6 Central Time for the next, I think I was going to do the next 2 chapters. I'm going to have to double check that. I might do 3. But yeah, I am really coming up on the end of this and I don't want to be. I'm sad about it. I hope that you guys have been enjoying this all. I'm going to be very sorry to say goodbye to the series for the time being, but if any of you want to commission his other series, let me know. Somebody had reached out about it, but they haven't gotten back to me. And if you do, I can add that to the list and get that started around March is when my next slots are open. So let me know. All right, guys, I will see you tomorrow. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.